Now, Claire, you studied interior architecture. Is that right? Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so, let me talk to you about how interior architecture, the design of interior spaces, can help save our planet.
Oh, that's a big question. How long have we got? Yes, interior architecture. So first off, when I first started studying interior architecture, people go, "Oh, what interior design?" And interior design is part of it. Architecture is part of it, but it's really about constructing the interior of a building. So an architect will generally design the shell. And then an interior architect might come in and do everything from lighting decisions to mechanical, electrical engineering as well. So sort of everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about the way that interior architecture could work, we could think about how to make things that could change and flex according to the changing needs of the user. So the way a building is designed, the shell will remain the same.
Mm-hmm.
And really when we think about embodied carbon, i.e. the amount of emissions and energy that have gone into making anything, you want to keep it for as long as possible. So if we have a building, you don't want to be demolishing it and starting from scratch. So then an interior architect can come in and design a space that it can be amended. So for example, if the studio, you need to double the space of the studio. You could do it with relative ease without demolishing something, or items could be movable or dismantleable, and you can change. And buildings will change the same as people's needs will change. And also the materials that you choose. Are you choosing materials that are fit for purpose? Are you choosing materials that maybe have a recycled content? Yeah, I know, recycling, the lowest of the low. But, if we think about reprocessing our materials, we also need to have an avenue for that.
Yeah.
So if we are, able to specify or choose a material that has had a previous life, then that shows that it has value to it, which means it's more likely to be collected and more likely to be reprocessed rather than being incinerated or binned.
Yeah.
So all of those decisions really, really can make a difference.
Yeah, it seems to me that we often don't think about our spaces in that way, and yet the average American house is approaching 3,000 square feet, I believe, and we talked about it in our first film, Minimalism, with the heat map study, where we basically use 40% of our houses, and as the houses get bigger, that percentage doesn't stay the same. It actually decreases, right? And so some people use 10% of their house, right? I remember when I saw Deion Sanders, he built a tiny house, back house for his mansion, basically. But the tiny house he built was 7,000 square feet.
Wow.
And I
all
guess
perspective, I guess.
Yeah, tiny's relative, I suppose, right? And so when we're thinking about our spaces, we're thinking about heating them, cooling them. These things all have an impact on the environment. And if we can consider that up front when we're building a house, we're thinking about the square foot. How much space do I actually need? It doesn't mean everyone needs to live in a tiny house. The question is, what is appropriate for you in your life? I have friends who have 6 kids. And so putting them in a tiny house would be a nightmare, I think, right? But there are some people who just want very little, and then they can fit in a tiny house or a small apartment or whatever is appropriate for them. So they're not wasting a bunch of space, because in our society, as soon as we get more space, we feel so compelled to fill it.
Yeah, it's like time, isn't it? You expand to fill whatever you have. So if a task, if you've got an hour to do a 10-minute task, it's going to take you an hour to do it. Just the way that it is.
Yeah.
Exactly the same with spaces. But I think what's interesting about buildings, architecture, quite often, the bigger the better. The bigger the house, the more successful you are.
Yeah.
And that really is not the case when you think about, in the UK, we've got, the cost of energy is increasing dramatically because of different price caps that are changing in April this year. So there's already lots of discussion about how the spaces that people own are going to cost them more money. So we've got lots of things that compounded, some because of COVID and some for different reasons. And I think that's making a lot of people look at the spaces they have and think, do I really need to live in such a big place? Because you've got to heat it, you've got to maintain it. And when you're building stuff, are you building it to the highest ability to retain its heat when it's got the heat? Renewable energy, why are we not having solar panels if it's suitable for where you're living? Or some form of energy regeneration, as well as, the landscaping not just being a tag on, but being something that is integral to the way that our buildings are designed.
Yeah.
This is often where regulation goes wrong, because in California, I heard Bill Maher talking about this recently. All of the hoops he had to jump through in order to get his house to be solar powered, because of all. Now, this is lobbyists who lobby the government to prevent, solar from being installed easily. Now, it's not that we don't want any regulations around that. We want people to be safe. We want to be installed correctly. But at the same time, we don't want it to be so difficult that it discourages everyone from going. I mean, we live in California.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it make sense for there to be way more solar energy here?
Yeah. And what's interesting also about different renewable energies is one of the pushbacks you get is people saying, well, the payoff costs, so how long it's going to take to recoup back the benefits in a monetary sense, the cost that it has, are just too big. But the efficiency of things are changing every single year. So, every single time that we go through a new generation of solar panel or any kind of renewable energy, it's getting better. It's becoming more efficient. They're getting slimmer. They're becoming less obtrusive. You can recess them into roof lines so they don't have any kind of obstructive ability to sort of looking at a beautiful house anymore.
Yeah.
And it's also about discovering what is best for that type of home or building and exactly where you are in the world. So, yeah, in the UK, we have a lot of solar, but that's not going to be generating as much power as it would be on most days in LA, for example.
Right, yeah.
So there's other things that people can look at as well. But having this sort of the lobbyist of it doesn't look attractive or it shouldn't be there, we need to think way, way beyond that now. We need a suite of solutions, not one silver bullet.
I like where you're going with that, because what we're talking about also is eventually, as it gets better, it becomes more aesthetically pleasing as well. We may get to a point where solar is so much more aesthetically pleasing than a regular roof. You're like, oh, why would I want a roof when I can have that beautiful new version of solar energy? It looks stunning, and oh, by the way, it powers my house for free, basically.
Yeah, it might even be films that go on glass, so you can't even see it.
That's beautiful.
Or paint that can help absorb carbon and then, create energy from that. So there's so much like mind-blowing research that's going into this.
Yes.
So it's something that is coming more and more and more, and in an exciting way, really exciting way.
Did you enjoy this standalone Patreon highlight? If so, you can listen to full episodes of the Minimalist Private Podcast, available exclusively on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/theminimalists or click the link in the description. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free.